Okay, so I wanted to start today off with a question. So by raise of hands, who here has seen The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit? Okay, perfect, thank you. So growing up, these are my favorite stories because they were stories about adventure and a desire to see more than just what you normally see on a daily basis. And although Bilbo and Frodo were comfortable in their own homes, they decided to take the risk, and their whole perspective on the world was changed because of it. My first international traveling experience was when I was 8 years old. My mom decided to homeschool us for a semester so we could travel in Europe for a month. And this trip turned into a love for adventure and a familiarity of cultures entirely different than our own. The opportunity to immerse myself in these cultures changed my views entirely. Acts 1:8 says, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." Beyond our own wanted travel, God encourages us to venture out in His beautiful creation. And He wants us to see the beauty in His design. And this isn't just in nature, but also in His people as well. Because by meeting people and spreading His love is how we can really make an impact. And it gives us a chance to take part in something greater than ourselves. We gain a better understanding of ourselves, our blessings, and the bigger picture of everything, not just our own individual lives. And that's why I decided to do my capstone on the importance and impact traveling has on everyone if we choose to interact and shape our lives with new lessons and viewpoints. I've been extremely lucky to grow up in many different environments surrounded by many different cultures. And through this, I've become aware of the importance of perspective and seeing new ways of life. After our first trip, my family and I continued our adventures with a month in China, a month in Vietnam, a month in Europe again, a month in South America, most recently a month in India, and in June, all the privilege of adding Turkey to that list. And I wanted to interview someone whose trips were similar to our own, so I interviewed a family friend named Sarah Shoemaker. She was working in the mission field in third world countries for long periods of time and has traveled to over 50 countries internationally. And like our vacations, she's endured a level of uncomfortableness when away from her home. So she stayed in places that only had the necessities, really just undertaking the true meaning of branching out. And Sarah states, "I view travel as a gift God's offered me, so there's a bit of stewardship in it. It can't just be all about lavishness and fun. There has to be some sort of element of connecting with the people." A story I thought was really interesting took place on one of her mission trips, because she was working with an organization called Child Restoration Outreach Program, which basically just helped children whose parents weren't properly taking care of them in the way that they should. So they would come and they would receive a meal and they would talk about Jesus. And in this part of the world, it was very significant to have your picture taken because it rarely happened, and if it did, the film took a week to develop before you even saw how it turned out. So the lady who headed up this organization decided it would be a good idea to do pictures for all the boys. So she came and she took pictures of them. She got the film developed and laid it all out on the board and brought it back so they could see. And they were able to recognize every single person in the photo except for one. And that was themselves. Because they had never seen themselves. They had no idea what they looked like. There are no mirrors, no phones, the puddles were murky, nothing that could clearly show them their reflection. This is the exact opposite to what we have today. Because we constantly know what we look like 100% of the time, and how we present ourselves in our culture is something that really matters. And hearing stories like these can really open our eyes to the differences in the world God made. Life in America is not the only way of life, but the best way of life. There are values that we miss when we simply disregard other countries' lifestyles. There are values of not being obsessive with the way we look. And I found it really interesting, the idea of not even recognizing our own faces is such a foreign idea to everyone here, including myself. Another thing that we talked about was the love that we found in third world countries. And this is like true Christian love for the Lord. Both of us have been to places in which we've seen extreme poverty, trash littering the streets, people surviving with almost nothing. The exact opposite of our very fortunate conditions that most of us here find familiar. But in that, we found people that discovered how to worship, serve, and be thankful for what they had. When my family and I were traveling in Ecuador, we had met a woman who had found this joy and devotion to God. And despite her not being as fortunate as us, Wealth is irrelevant to her because she had placed her significance in something far greater. Proverbs 11:4 says, "Wealth is worthless in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death." And God really did do great things through her, because she transcribed the entire Bible into the language of her tribe, really making an impact towards his kingdom. And she's such an inspiration to me whose spiritual relationship is often impacted by the circumstances that I'm currently facing. So if my life is going well, it's easy to praise God and I feel a deep connection to him. But if I'm facing trials, it's easy to lose that love and devotion. Traveling there and meeting that incredible woman really put in focus for me what it means to have a true, unwavering passion in Christ. And had I not traveled there, I wouldn't have ever gotten to recognize my own flaws and failures as a Christian, and talking with Sarah Shoemaker was a really great way to reflect back on this. In November, I did some more work for this capstone, focusing more on the aspect of how to organize a trip. And I did this by planning a trip to San Francisco. We didn't have enough time to take a month anywhere too adventurous, so San Francisco had to suffice. We went, we saw the Golden Gate Bridge, the Seals at Pier 39, we went to the Ghirardelli Chocolate Factory, and we visited Chinatown. And it might not have been one of our usual larger vacations somewhere less common, but I learned quite a few things. I've always been the kid on all of our vacations. My mom would plan everything out, and my sister and I would just follow along the whole time. But this trip was different, though, because I was in charge of planning everything out, and my mom just came along to make sure I didn't get myself killed. She basically pretended she wasn't even there. So I booked the flights, called the Ubers, found us a place to stay, figured out what we should see, wrote down the times to fit everything in, and found out how long it would take to get around. And as fun as it was anything but perfect. I miscalculated times, forgot to check in for our flight, temporarily lost our flight reservations, missed where we were supposed to get off the cable car, and a ton of other things. And that was only for one day of travel, a single day. And it gives me so much respect for my mom, who spends countless hours organizing these month-long vacations for me and my family. And it made me realize how much time and effort has to be put in order to have the opportunity to see new places like this. And even beyond the difficulty of planning it, you have to be willing to put yourself outside your box of comfort. And for me, that was the aspect of planning a trip and all of the complications that come with that. But for someone else, it may be the idea of leaving their home and leaving what they find familiar to go on an adventure. Another challenging but amazing opportunity I had was getting to visit Annapolis Church here in Colorado. I went with an older woman named Lucy, who's a friend of my family's, and she works with Annapolis refugees who have traveled to America. So she's been attending that church for a few years now to go back and visit some of the people that she had helped bring there. And I was definitely nervous to go into this unknown environment, my only known face being a woman that I hadn't spoken to since I was a little girl. But walking up to the church cleared all those worries away. The service had already started because Lucy and I were a bit late, but you could already hear their songs of worship from outside the building. You could tell it wasn't just the band members singing, but the whole congregation lifting their voices up to the Lord. Lucy arrived just a few minutes later, and we both went in to join the service. And it was even more beautiful inside. And it wasn't the physical church building that made it beautiful, but more the people that made it this way. It was really cool to see this group of around 40 people in their traditional clothing singing praises to the Lord in their native language. And it was, yeah. And then when I came in, people immediately came up to welcome us. So young kids smiled and waved at me, and they even came up and hugged my legs. And an older woman that I didn't know, she didn't speak English, came up and cupped my face in my face in her hands, which was the sweetest thing ever. And the pastor, his wife, and quite a few other people just came up and made me feel really welcome to the church. And you could tell these people weren't attending church for the sake of appearing like a good Christian every Sunday, but they were genuinely excited to be there in a very real and tangible way. Their excitement to me didn't feel forced at all, and I knew my presence was legitimately wanted, which was such a good feeling. After being greeted, we listened to a few more songs. I obviously didn't understand what any of them were saying because they were Nepalese, but it still might be one of the times that I felt most involved in worship. Because to me, there were no words, but it was easy to feel the presence of God here. Everyone was just so passionate in their praise that just listening to their songs in their beautiful language was enough to set your focus on God. After worship, the pastor came on stage and, to my surprise, introduced me to the rest of the church. So everyone turned around and looked and waved at me, and then they all started trying to pronounce my name, which has proven to be quite difficult in the past, because when we were in China, my tour guide called me Larry for a whole month. But pretty soon, the whole church was just filled with people saying, Riley, 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 over and over again, which is an experience I never thought I would have. Then the service continued with as normal with the pastor's lesson. And this was also mainly in Nepalese, so I didn't understand the majority of it, but it was still really interesting to observe the little cultural differences in which their service went along in comparison to mine. So people would just shout praises randomly in the middle of service, most likely emphasizing something the pastor had said. And one man even interrupted to read a passage of scripture that I assumed tied into the teaching for that day. But although most things were similar to the way we perform services, little cultural differences such as those really seem to create an atmosphere centered around community. Afterwards, I was introduced to a few other people, and then we all filed out of the church. Overall, going to this church was a really amazing experience for me. And even as someone who has been to a good amount of other countries and seen a good amount of other cultures, it's always beneficial getting to experience new culture, and I always continue to learn from it. In this trip, I was really able to see how much these people value community and how that impacted their life in the church. I think there's a lot more to unpack from this that I'll certainly continue to reflect on after my capstone project. Throughout all my travels, I've become very familiar with the idea of gratitude, or more specifically, gratitude for everything I find when coming back from vacations. Because traveling the way we do, with only a backpack of necessities on your back, really makes you more grateful for everything you find when returning home from these type of trips. And I've seen this play out in little ways, like being thankful for a shower that doesn't run out of hot water, or being thankful to sleep on an actual bed instead of a cardboard box. Little things like this that have the power to completely change your perspective on how you view your life. This year, I had the pleasure of interviewing a man named Subash, who, to a greater extent, got to experience this gratitude and now gets to share his story with others. Subash was born and raised in a Nepalese refugee camp, completely unfamiliar with the outside world. He didn't have a phone, a TV, or any other electronic device kids today are so used to. Every morning, he would wake up and he would walk 25 minutes to return with 15 gallons of water on his back. And most of the time, he would fail to get enough to make himself breakfast, and he was forced to go to school hungry. And this happened because his family was placed in one of the lowest castes, and the people in the higher castes would always fill their buckets of water first because they were believed to be better than anyone below them. And they would not leave enough water for the people in the lower castes. And Subash told me a story once of a low caste man who was filling his bucket at the same time a higher caste man was filling his, and ended up getting brutally beaten by the higher caste man with his buckets, almost to death. And he was never forced to pay any type of punishment for this, because the law almost never enforces punishment with the higher caste, but it's always significantly more harsh with the lower. And this isn't the only way these people are unjustly privileged, because jobs there are associated with your last name. So if you have a lower caste last name, then you automatically are not allowed certain jobs the higher caste people can have. And these are always the better jobs that pay more and are just all around more enjoyable to do. Not getting one of these jobs would mean you were stuck doing things like cleaning up after animals or collecting trash. God tells us that we are all created equal in His image. What this caste system was doing was defining people by their worth, saying that a certain group of people was better than another group, and unjustly labeling the lower class as worthless. Unfortunately, this whole corrupt caste system was not foreign to Subash, and his first personal experience with it happened when he was just 10 years old. He had gone over to his friend's house to help him with homework when his friend's dad returned, and he dragged Subash out of the house, yelling at him for coming to a high caste home. And his life was never really the same after this. It was difficult on him mentally, having so many people constantly looking down at him. He was confused and helpless as he watched this mistreatment only grow. And this is when he started attending church more. So almost everyone in the camp was Hindu, so Christianity was greatly looked down. But by attending church, he began to feel free from the judgment and mistreatment of himself. There he was able to put his entire focus on the God who loved him for who he was. And Subhash said that church was the thing that really helped him through the last few years at the refugee camp. When he was 14 years old, Subhash finally moved to America, where he experienced freedom that he had never experienced before. His future was no longer bound by his last name, and he was free to worship God without fear of being mocked or ridiculed. And Subhash's story isn't meant to glorify America and tell us of its greatness compared to that of Nepal, but rather it should encourage people like us to actually be grateful for what we have. Because stories like these teach us lessons, and they broaden our perspective so we can see the bigger picture and learn more about ourselves in the process. And traveling does this to an even greater extent. So it's less about hearing these stories and comparing them to our lives, and more about experiencing these stories and actually allowing them to have a real and genuine impact on you. Exposing yourself to other cultures and allowing yourself to be shaped by not only the enjoyable experiences, but the difficult ones as well is what traveling is all about. My capstone this year has helped me develop my beliefs about God and adventure further. And I've learned that no matter where you go, traveling is an opportunity to see new cultures that aren't your own. And you gain memories, perspective, life-changing lessons, and a greater understanding of God's world that He created. There's more ways to live life than just how we do life here in America. Traveling also allows us to positively impact our brothers and sisters. And it's difficult to plan trips, but even though it requires a ton of effort, what you take away from it is far more valuable. Amanda Martinez says, when you travel, you meet new people, cultures, experience new things, embark on all sorts of adventures, good and bad, and perhaps even redefine your meaning of life. And this is the true meaning of travel. So I encourage you, book a plane ticket, go to that place that you've always wanted to go to, and allow yourself to be genuinely impacted by it. Thank you.